Everybody, welcome back to the series Cinematically Late. Today we are talking about another movie that I am unfortunately late about. Now actually I'm doing a couple of videos here. I promise you a new video every single week. I'm in the middle of moving. As you might be able to tell a little bit, it looks very much the same as to where I was previously in my last few videos. But this is my new place. I'm kind of in transition, still trying to figure out what I want where. But I have a couple new friends with me, or some old friends as well, including Thanos, John Wick, and Pennywise here on the side, as you can see. But today we're going to be talking about a movie that I saw recently, title of Gemini Man. Now this one is a very interesting one. This one stars Will Smith, big movie for him. Well, I shouldn't say it's a big movie for him, but he's a big movie star. He's been kind of out of the game for a while, kind of a resurgence with this one and now Bad Boys for Life, or whatever the third one's called. So he's been on a resurgence, and this was sort of one of his major, I guess, comebacks with director Ang Lee. Now, this movie was in development hell for quite some time, but really that's just part of the whole Cinematically Late thing. Let's go ahead and get into it as to my top couple things that I want to talk about Gemini Man. Alright, starting off with point number one. This is a not so great movie, but for some reason there's something about it that I couldn't stop watching. It's actually a really great movie in parts. It's not meant to be like this over-the-top amazing movie. It's going to be winning and sweeping all the awards like a Joker or a whatever recently came out that swept a lot of awards other than Joker. But it's not meant to be that movie. It's a fun, kind of a dumb action movie, and I think that's the reason why I kept coming back to it and thinking there was such a fun ride. It's not perfect, there's a lot of flaws throughout, but that is definitely one of the main selling points, is that it's dumb, but it's fun dumb. And then kind of going back to something that I said earlier, which leads me to point number two, is that this movie was actually stuck in development hell for the longest of times. It had Will Smith attached to it for probably the longest, but it's had a bunch of different directors, actors, you name it, attached to it. Now, it was originally, I think, written or meant to be produced, I think, in around the late 80s, early 90s, if memory serves correctly, and it definitely shows. The direction style, it is modern. There's a lot of those CGI moments, especially with young Will Smith, because the technology is now more relevant than ever. It wasn't really back then. So that's what took partially so long, kind of like what happened with Avatar. James Cameron had shelved it for so long just because the technology to make it just didn't exist yet. Very much like in this movie. It just didn't have the technology available to make an actor appear as them young selves right next to their older selves. So that was finally the technology available. This movie was also shot in, I believe, 120 frames per second, which some theaters showed. I never got to see it. I just saw the regular 4K HD version, but it's still pretty awesome to watch overall. Pretty good visuals, but you can tell by the story that this isn't meant to be a modern story. This makes a lot more sense with fitting into those early 90s, mid 90s to maybe even late 80s kind of action thrill rides, and it very much feels like that from start to finish. For the most part, there's really not anything that's like, wow, this feels like a modern masterpiece. It feels like this is a modern movie with a very, very old script behind it, and it shows throughout the entire film. And now on to point number three, which kind of goes back to a little bit what I just touched on in point number two, is that young Will Smith and the CG of this movie actually looked pretty good for the most part. It wasn't perfect, there were some flaws, but when they really focus in on his face and you get to see like the pores, especially if you get to see it in 4K, it's awesome. It looks really, really good. Now, the caveat to that is that there are certain things that don't look so good. You can definitely tell that they worked really hard on those particular scenes, but other scenes, it just kind of, maybe they just ran out of time or ran out of budget, and you can tell it just doesn't quite fit as well as the rest of the movie. So that kind of leads me into point number four, is that along with the good CGI number three, the bad CGI number four, it kind of shows, and especially in one major fight scene. Well, I would say probably about two major fight scenes between young Will Smith and old Will Smith. They get to look kind of more like Blade 2, early sort of CG fight scenes where it looks like kind of just ragdolls flopping around doing these various fights, and you can tell that it's very not real. And that was kind of disappointing because, I mean, it was mostly in the dark, so you probably could have just shot with somebody else and it just called it the same guys or it had a look-alike, but it just looked so floppy and weird at sometimes that it was pretty apparent that these were clearly CGI characters, or at least in the fight scenes more than anything else. And I guess really all I have for point number 5 would be something that I kind of already said, which, because it was in development hell, it very much suits a different time period, even though it has the modern technologies of cameras and CGI work and things like that. So it just feels like such an 90s movie, maybe early 2000s, the very latest, and it shows. And I think that's the biggest downfall, but it's some of those movies that were around that time that were also the most fun. So that's maybe why I think I found this movie to be so much more fun than a lot of other action movies that may be out now that maybe take themselves a little bit too seriously. This movie did take itself seriously in a lot of aspects. But I feel like this one was just so much fun. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Maybe it's the Will Smith charisma. I don't know what you want to call it, but I had a great time with Gemini Man, and I highly recommend watching it, even if it's just for a one-time go-around during this COVID-19 stuck-at-home situation, whatever it may be. It's worth a watch. I highly recommend checking it out, especially if you can watch it in 4K, just so you can get those good visuals on the CGI of young Will Smith. Highly recommend. But other than that, that's really all my thoughts on points and things I wanted to touch on this episode of Cinematically Late. Make sure you guys let me know your thoughts and opinions. If you have seen Gemini Man, down in the comment section down below. Also, while you're down there, let me know if there are any other movies that you may want to suggest for this series. I would love to hear them. I have a couple more coming up. Have a whole list of things that I want to get through, but make sure you guys like this video as well while you're down there, and subscribe, because we're going to have a new Cinematically Late every single Thursday coming at you guys. Promise it every single time. But yeah, other than that, that's really all my thoughts that I have for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.